Okay, and there's no way I could have 2 minutes and add the other 2 on at the end or anything like that, is there? No.
I'm bound by the rules of the House.
Yous are awful. Yous never allow me break the rules. I guess, Minister, the main reason why I wanted to raise this with you, sorry. Am I going ahead? Yeah. The main reason I wanted to raise this with you was because in my own area we got new schools added to the DEIS list, which was really very welcome, because you would have had a situation up until lately where, for example, on one side of the Long Mile Road you have the Assumption School in Walkinstown. That one section of it didn't have DEIS status, and across the road Drimna Castle, where boys went to go to school, and they did have DEIS status. So you would have kids in the one family, off the one street, from the one area, who are treated differently, even though the socio-economic status of the family and the area would remain the same. And this was a huge anomaly, it has been a huge anomaly that I believe the department has been trying to address. I think we need an updated report on that, because we're getting mixed messages back from some parts of the country about whether that's working or not. But my main point on the question of the hot meals is that last year it seems that it was announced that the hot meals would be extended to X amount of extra DEIS schools, 300 and something, that there be a total of 94 million or whatever spent on them. You can go through the figures, I'm sure you're prepared for them. But when many of the schools went to access the hot meal system, they were told it's not there, and it seems that the budget was falling well short of what it should have been, that somebody, as one of the principals said, somebody forgot to mention it in the budget. And I think that has been sorted out since, but I'd like a comprehensive answer on whether or not it has been sorted out. That's number one. And number two is, can you explain or comment on the system of reporting and accounting that schools must engage in to the Department of Social Protection and potentially to the Department of Education? Because I understand from some schools that this is quite cumbersome and difficult for them, particularly when they're not resourced with staff to deal with that. And we all know from the series of disputes and day strikes that the school secretaries had, that they are overburdened, underpaid and undervalued, and to ask them to take on that extra work without, particularly if it's cumbersome and difficult accounting system, that would not be fair, and that schools should be resourced to have somebody to deal with that, the issue of meals and accounting for them and accounting to the department specifically. The second question is a bit more not certainly out of the control of the hands of the department, but we should be keeping an eye on this, and I'd like to know what the Minister is going to do to address it. And that is the question of food inflation, because as we all know, food inflation is above all other types of inflation, apart from energy, one of the highest. Food inflation is like 9–10%. I think some quarters of the year of last year it has gone above that, up to 11 and 12%, and that's added a huge burden onto households, but clearly it's also adding on a factor of the provision of hot school meals, because it's a paltry sum actually that's allowed for each child in each school, but they seem to have been able to manage to deal, some schools have been able to manage to deal with local companies who've given them school meals for the price that exists. I want to argue, and I'm not sticking up for the companies here, I'm sticking up for the provision of hot food for the children, that we need to look at that rate because of food inflation, that at least, like I always argue, workers and pensioners and people on social protection need an income and pay rise that matches inflation. Equally, we need an increase in the allowance for the hot school meals that matches inflation, which is still running at 9 to 10% in the case of food inflation. That's not to say that companies aren't making profit out of it, I'm not arguing that, but there needs to be a matching of the funding, because I do know at least one major company in Dublin is struggling to continue to provide the hot meals at the rate that is given at the moment.
Look, I'm taking this matter on behalf of my colleague Heather Humphreys, TD Minister for Social Protection, and I thank the Deputy for raising this issue. The Schools Meals Programme funds the provision of food to some 1,600 schools and organisations benefiting 260,000 children. The objective of the programme is to provide regular nutritious food to children to enable them to take full advantage of the education provided to them. The programme is an important component of policies to encourage school attendance and extra educational achievement. At budget time, the government provided €94.4 million for the school meals programme for 2023. In recent years, entry to the school meals scheme has been confined to DEIS schools, in addition to schools identified as having a concentrated disadvantage that would benefit from access to the school's meals programme. Prior to the introduction of DEIS a number of years ago, all schools and organisations were part of a number of Department of Education initiatives for disadvantaged schools and were eligible to participate in the various programmes. These initiatives included Breaking the Cycle, Giving Children an Even Break, the Disadvantaged Area Scheme, Homeschool Community Liaison and School Completion Programmes. These schools and organisations have continued to remain in the scheme since the introduction of DEIS in 2005, but their level of funding has been capped at the same rate year on year to allow for the concentration of the programme on DEIS schools. So you can see there were a variety of different schemes in place, but essentially DEIS is the principal programme that's in place now, notwithstanding some of those are still in the system from prior to DEIS being introduced. The Minister is absolutely committed to continuing to grow the school meals programme, and in particular the hot school meals element, building further on the significant extensions announced in the last few budgets. In March 2022, the Minister for Education announced an extension of DEIS status to an additional 320 schools from September 2022. In July, the Minister for Social Protection announced that the access to the hot school meals option would be extended to 282 newly designated DEIS primary schools, and that the cold meal lunch would be extended to 38 newly designated DEIS secondary schools. This extension applied from September, benefiting some 60,000 students. This allowed all pupils in new DEIS schools to avail of the one substantial meal for the additional budget provided. Last week, the government approved an additional €14.5 million to allow access to the hot school meals programme for all remaining DEIS primary schools from September 2023, benefiting 64,500 students. The school currently have access to cold lunches funding. In addition, the government has approved the commencement of the rollout of the hot school meals programme to non-DEIS primary schools. There are no secondary school children in receipt of the hot school meals scheme, as it is aimed at primary schools with no on-site cooking facilities. In 2022, the Minister of Social Protection commissioned the evaluation of the school meals programme to review all elements of the programme. The final report was recently received and is currently being reviewed. The report will help to inform future decisions around this important programme, and I want to thank the Deputy for raising this particular matter, and I will concur with what the Deputy said about the actual issues in relation to the inclusion of various schools in the DEIS and other schools not included. We have the exact same situation in many areas. I know some personally where the same family are going to the same schools and they're literally on one side of the road, exactly as you've indicated, and one is in the DEIS area and the other isn't. So that is an area that is currently continually being reviewed.
Okay, thanks, Minister, and thanks for the written report, because it's good to have all those facts in writing. But what I really do want to ascertain is that the problem that arose last year, having had the announcement from the government that all DEIS schools would have access to the meals programme, hot meals for national schools and cold food for secondary schools, we found that the schools around the country, and to quote I suppose she's the head of the School Principals Association, Ms Tobin, deputy head, sorry, of the Irish Principals Network. She says, I now have to go and tell parents that it isn't the case that this scheme has been expanded to their school. I'm sure other schools which joined DEIS have had meals from day one, so I'm really disappointed. I hope someone in government will address this. We can't have children going without lunches. I think parents will be raging. So really my question is, has that legacy issue been dealt with? Is there now no problem with schools, if they try to access the scheme, being able to access, number one, And secondly, I do want to raise, having received your report, the question of the lack of availability or funding of hot meals for secondary schools. I think this is wrong, and I think it's wrong, and basically in the long term is not going to save the state any money, because a lot of teenagers leave school at lunchtime to go and buy chips or chicken roll sandwiches, which are not good for their health, which cause obesity, which are very expensive on the parents, and we are living in a cost of living crisis. And I don't need to tell you or anybody else in this house how that cost of living crisis really hurts parents and trying to afford food for children. So if you're forking out for a chicken roll sandwich or chips every lunchtime for your secondary school, your growing adolescent, going through puberty child, then what you're doing is you're paying 38 to 40 euro a week on top of all the other expenses. It's really not on, and the department should be seeing the responsibility of the provision of hot meals for all children, including secondary schools, as a priority.
Thank you, Deputy. And I understand the point you make. And the level of interest for the school meals programme is a clear sign of the need for its expansion, and is something that the Minister for Social Protection is prioritising. So the issues being highlighted today are being prioritised by the Minister. And as part of the measures announced by the Government last week, access to the hot school meals is being extended to the remaining 372 DEIS primary schools and all special schools from September. So I really want to stress that there are not as many special schools around the country, but their children who have most severe and profound difficulties, and up to now all schools were not included, and it really is a key priority that this will happen and be in place this coming September, in addition to the DEIS schools. And this will result in the number of schools that access to the hot meals scheme increasing from 37 to over 900 during the term of this actual government. The Minister for Social Protection will also bring forward proposal for the rollout of the hot school meals programme to non-DEIS primary schools, and significant additional funding has been provided for the programme. The total budget following this extension of the programme now stands at 108.9 million for 2022. This represents a 76% increase in funding since only 2020. And in this regard, the evaluation of the schools meals programme that the Minister commissioned last year will inform future policy decisions of the school programme. The final report was received recently and is currently being reviewed, so I'm not in a position to give any further details on that, but it will be published, and that's very important, in the coming weeks. And I will actually finally acknowledge the issue you mentioned in relation to the system of accounting for the schools meals system. Of course, that's an extra burden, and perhaps there can be more liaison with the contractors who regularly provide these directly to the school, in a way, if they can work closer together, maybe to simplify a system. But there is an additional burden from an administrative point of view, and I understand that. And the issue of food inflation is obviously something that will have to be taken account of in the budget that's coming up, next September, October, for the next school year. Thank you.